Hello, my name's Richard, and this is We're Not Wizards. Tonight's show is a work in progress show, and the title of the show is going to be called Let's Go Off Script for One Last Job. Now, I know why it's called that, and you will know why it's called that, because joining me tonight is a gentleman by the name of Brian Cronin. So, good evening, Brian.
Good evening. Good afternoon for me, but good evening to you.
Yeah, because you're in California.
I am.
All across the other side of the world. It's almost like the magic of the internet.
It is an amazing thing.
It's an amazing thing that we're talking in real time and we're not like a news report. Well, I'm going to say, and how are you today, Brian? And then you get the minute silence and then you go, I'm fine.
Oh, that would be interesting to try.
Okay. So how are you today, Brian?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
That's good. So you're from Off Script Games. We brought Brian on because he's going to be talking about his asymmetric heist-based card game called One Last Job, and you can guess kind of potentially what that's about. But Brian loves his cardboard, he loves his tabletop, he obviously loves his card games, and we're going to find out, as normal, a little bit more about the background to that. For everybody who's joining us for the first time, thank you very much for coming on board. The reason that we do this is because we firmly believe that there's quite simply not enough podcasts out there about board games. We have checked, just can't find them. The other reason, the others don't. I obviously don't use iTunes or internet or anything at all.
But you are confident there are no other.
I am absolutely, as confident as a chocolate teapot.
Okay, I've not heard that one. That we don't say that in California, but
probably not. Well, probably because all the chocolate would have melted in California before that time.
It's true.
To solidify. Okay, just to make me feel absolutely jealous because it is raining outside. It is the height of summer in lovely Scotland, and it is absolute. It's like, I don't know. It's like God is crying on us. But what's the weather like in California today, Brian?
Well, I'm looking out my window right now. It's currently 1 p.m. here, local time. It is very sunny, not a cloud in the sky. I'd say it's about, I don't know Celsius, but it's about 75 degrees Fahrenheit here. Okay. And are you nice and comfortable, and there's aircon going on, and you have a nice cold drink and everything like that? Some of that. I'm very comfortable, though.
Thanks for that. That just makes me feel all the much better. It is actually now, they've launched the lifeboats outside, so we better...
You know what? We could use some of that rain still. So
is it not very very dry in California? So I'll tell you what. I'll send you some rain if you send me over some of that lovely California sun.
I will agree to that, not knowing how to make that actually happen.
Well, you have to. You're a programmer. You can make these kind of things happen. I'm pretty sure you can make these things happen. Let's, because what we like to do in We're Not Wizards is we like to kind of jump a little back into the past before putting an eye on the present and then planning out a bank job for the future. So do you want to tell the good people kind of how you got into the kind of the hobby to begin with?
Okay, the hobby being board games, I guess.
Board games, tabletop, anything along those lines.
Sure. I'm fairly new to tabletop gaming in that I've only really started playing board games probably about 8 years ago, which is somewhat new because I know there's a lot of people out there that have been playing for 20 and 30 years. So I kind of got into it right as it was really coming into the mainstream, I'd say, of the modern designer games. And I just had a friend that invited me over, and we played a cooperative Ghost Stories. We played. I remember this was
right. Okay, yeah.
The Ghost Stories was probably the first board game I played that wasn't in the Monopoly kind of Hasbro genre of games, and it just blew my mind. We lost horribly, I think 2 times in a row because that game is ridiculously hard. Yeah. I just started buying board games after that and went down the rabbit hole and haven't come back up since.
What was the first game that you went out and bought yourself then? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. This is kind of a weird one. I mean, we actually had played some board games before. We played party games like Cranium.
Yeah.
But, not the kind of designer board games. So the first designer board game I bought was a game called Castle Panic. I'm sure some people are familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a kind of it's a box that's kind of like you're looking into what appears to be like an open drawbridge, and there's just a couple of eyes kind of sticking out of you in the dark.
Yeah, that's it. So it's kind of it was marketed as a tower defense cooperative board game. I like playing the cooperative game first really blew my mind that you'd have this board game you can play as a team against the game was kind of a great idea, I thought. So yeah, I that was recommended on a YouTube video I watched, and I just kind of bought it, and we played that game dozens of times and ended up having to modify the rules to make it more difficult for us.
Yeah.
And went on from there to all sorts of other games. But that was the first one I think I purchased myself.
So, spill your guts then, Brian. How many board games would you say you've got at the moment?
Oh, not as many as some. I have a decent kind of closet here in my office that's full of board games that I've contained it all to. And I'm definitely at the point now where if I'm going to buy a game, I'm going to get rid of something. But I think I probably have... I'd say about 30 to 40 games that I kind of, really value and really I'm always looking to play. And then I probably have another 10 to 20 that are kind of I need to get rid of and clean out.
That's a reasonable size. That's a decent size. That's not too much.
Yeah.
That's not too much. That's not in getting into ridiculous kind of piles of shelving behind you. That's something that you can quite comfortably keep away, if you need to. Part
of that is just I've been very lucky to have a good group of friends in the area that have board games. So my friend Jorge has all the board games I could ever want to play, and so I haven't. He's kind of been holding on to the collection, and he just keeps buying them, so I don't need to, and that type of thing.
Is he the one that's kind of like, is he the guy that goes like, when he goes Kickstarter, he goes all out? Is he the guy that if there's an Emperor pledge on a Kickstarter game, he'll be the guy that's kind of backing it?
He definitely has some disposable income, and I think he's taken it easy on Kickstarters recently, but there definitely was a phase where he was getting, like multiple Kickstarter games in every month, and we had weighed. He still has a just shelf in his house of games that he has yet to play that,
really?
When I go over there, it's like, let's pull something down from that shelf and play it.
But that must be kind of cool, though, because it must be like every day is kind of like, must be rent like a little bit like Christmas round at his house then, if you're kind of turning up.
Absolutely. I just went over there last weekend. We played Dark Souls.
Okay.
I think that was the first time we played that. So yeah, it's fun though.
What did you think of Dark Souls then?
So, I have never played the PC game of Dark Souls for no reason in particular. Just haven't gotten around to it. But my understanding of it is like you kind of die a lot. You play through the same area and level up your character until you get through that area. That's kind of my understanding of how Dark Souls works as a game system. So going into the board game, I kind of had that mindset, and it's a cooperative game. It's a little bit of rules that you have to pick up on. Like we did a half an hour, probably just understanding what's going on. Then we started playing, and I thought it encompassed the PC game. Encompassed? I don't know if that's the right word.
No, that's right. No.
Yeah. It felt like the PC game, as I understand it, in that we kind of it's all about just like grinding through the same area, but you start to understand the patterns of the characters. Your strategy starts to solidify. So we kind of we'd take our first encounter was maybe 20 minutes, and then we went through that same encounter a couple more times, and by the end of it, we were just like almost fast forwarding through it. We just knew what to do, and our characters were so leveled up that we were able to. So it was it felt like really close to what I imagine the PC game is like to play, which is always cool, and you have a board game that is trying to capture that feeling. Yeah,
there's a podcast I listen to and I've been listening to for a number of years called Bonfireside Chat. One of the hosts has been on the show, Gary. So hello, Gary, and hello to Cole as well, but he's not been on. But they have this thing about knowledge compressing space. So it's the ability that once you know how an area is it works in Dark Souls, something that would normally take you kind of like 2 hours will take you kind of like 5 minutes. And I think they managed to kind of get that working in the board game, and the fact that the first time you go into a room and fight somebody, you'll be like, it will take you a long time and you'll battle through, but by the time you've done it for the third or fourth time, you've kind of powered yourself up that you are just kind of powering through the room itself.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And also we did one of the boss fights before we had to stop playing, and we lost a boss fight the first time, wasn't even close. And then I started to realize what we need to do here is we need to understand the pattern, because it's a very specific pattern the enemy fights at, like a boss battle in a video game. We need to figure out the pattern, we need to figure out how to exploit it. So we ended up getting this magical spell that allows me to push an enemy back. And through the power of push, and through Jorge, he had kind of a poison ability. We're able to combo those and manage our stamina, right, to just sort of push the boss back, poison them, wait a little bit, and that was kind of the pattern we figured out. It felt like we were cheating. It felt like we exploited kind of a bug in the game, but it wasn't. It was all intentional, and it felt like a boss battle in a video game. It was really cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the rules, isn't it? I mean, if they allow anything in a video game, then nowadays, unless it's an obvious kind of glitch, it's kind of anything's kind of fair game. I think that's what's said again, is something that's said about Dark Souls. It's like, if you can cheese a boss by hitting him with arrows repeatedly, then yes, you're meant to be able to do that. It's not like cheating per se.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like using the mechanics of the game to kind of get through itself. Have you, I mean, apart from Dark Souls, anything else you've been playing at the moment?
I'm definitely so I don't have a huge board game collection. This is partly due to my pattern of play, which is I end up going really deep into a particular game for sometimes years at a time.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I invest a lot of my time. So for the past few years, it's been Netrunner has been kind of my game of choice.
Really?
Yeah. So I still put a lot of time into that game, and I'm just very much about honing skill and going deep into a game. So that's where I still put the majority of my board game, tabletop gaming time into.
Have you completed your collection of Netrunner? I mean, do you have binders and folders and?
So I started playing the year it came out. I started playing in late 2012 when it was released. It was the first card game I played. I played more than a game of Magic before, So that was another just mind expanding moment where I kind of just intuitively understood this game system is amazing, and there's infinite possibilities here, and there's more cards coming out all the time. So yeah, I do have a full collection. I have kind of 3 boxes, box-sized boxes full of cards with all organized, and I have a bunch of promos and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of my main obsession.
Do you have kind of Brian's winning set? I mean, have you changed kind of the tactics as you've been playing it? I mean, do you have to end up kind of changing your tactics as they release the new packs of cards, or have you got a firm favorite that you always kind of stick to?
I mean, I think both are true. It's a living card game, so they're constantly releasing new cards about once a month, and that inevitably shifts the meta and shifts what you have to play to compete. And I do tend to be a more competitive player. I do play kind of so-called fun stuff occasionally at our less competitive meetups, but I do always tend to, if I don't win, I kind of want to play the competitive stuff and start winning again is sort of what I end up doing. So I tend to play the runner faction I play the most is probably Anarch. They're kind of a little more aggro. They're more about destruction. Mm-hmm. Corporation's a little more fluid, but I've always enjoyed NBN as my favorite there.
See, what struck me about Netrunner when I first played it was just like yourself. Apart from a couple of games, maybe a Pokemon, it was the first kind of proper card game. It was how completely asymmetrical it was.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me.
To the point of the fact that you were actually doing completely different things even though you were playing the same game. And it just completely blew my mind because you were sitting across from somebody who had a deck of cards that had the same kind of artwork on it, had the same kind of numbers on their cards and stuff like that, but the game that they were playing was completely different, and there was no way that you could even... It made it very, very difficult to anticipate potentially what somebody was doing, and at the moment that just completely blew my mind, and also the fact that you were actually scoring cards to win. You weren't just wiping things out. You weren't just defeating people. Like, you were actually saying, right, I'm going to need to do this. You were kind of upgrading cards to score. You know, all that entire kind of
I think
meta.
I think it's probably worth quickly describing what the game's about. I mean, it's a popular game. Probably most of your listeners know it, but just in case.
Let's do this, because one of the things everybody, we say this again and again and again. We're all for accessibility into the hobby, and people will heard of Netrunner, but Netrunner, as you say, it's been going 5 years now. So for people who have seen Netrunner, and they'll probably see it everywhere because it does sell everywhere, how would you best describe kind of Netrunner itself?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two ways to describe it. The first is that it's narratively what's going on. It's a hacking game sometime in the future. I think it's roughly 200 years in the future. There's megacorps, and they are megacorps. They have like business interests, and they're both evil and they're both good at the same time. It's a kind of very gray setting. And then you have what they call runners, which are hackers. And hackers are motivated by different things. Some of them want money. Some of them want just the intrinsic knowledge and skill of learning and hacking, and just that there's no money behind it. They just want to learn and know. And then some of them want to bring down the system that they view as oppressive. So they're the anarchs. And then the corporations represent different, like one of them is an information, almost like a Fox news company. One of them makes robots that are like the labor force of the future. They have different kind of business interests, and some of them are more aggressive. Some of them are a little bit more insidious in the way they attack the runner. So that's kind of the narrative structure. The game itself has some really interesting properties. As you said, it's asymmetric, so it's a two-player game. One side is the megacorp, the other side is the runner. The megacorp is playing hidden cards, so all the cards they play onto the table are face down to start, and then they get what they say rezzed. They get flipped face up at certain points in the game, depending on all sorts of conditions. That's one really interesting property. The runner's all face up, the corp is all face down. Yeah. And then it's asymmetric in that it's kind of an attack and defense game. The runner is generally attacking the corp, and there's kind of a defenses the corporation will play to slow down and stop the runner. And then there's also ways that the corporation can attack the runner. Kind of, if I know where you are and I know you've attacked me, I can send a missile down on your house. And then there's also some ways they can attack you through the net and all this kind of stuff. But that's kind of the high level idea of what's going on in the game.
It's one of these games that you can play a basic game and you can sit down and you can learn the rules, and then you could sit down with somebody new and you could both get through and you could get a decent game. But the difference between you seeing somebody playing at a beginner level and probably the level that you're playing at is just night and day. It's almost like a asymmetrical chess. one of you is playing chess and the other one's doing like Formula One Grand Prix.
Yeah, it does have at a high level of play. It's a very consistent game, I'd say. Even though the main way you win in the game is by scoring these agendas, which are cards in the corporation's deck. The corporation has to do that, and the runner has to do that. And there's variance there. There's maybe 10 of these cards in the 45 card deck, and so the runner's trying to basically find them in various ways. And there's some probability there. But even with that probability and with just the variance of card draw, there's a world champion in Netrunner who's been the world champion 2 years in a row. The people who tend to place very high in tournaments tend to place very high in tournaments again. It's a very consistent game. I think it's also worth pointing out that you touched on this, but most card games I've seen have the basic structure of Magic, where you have creatures or people you play down, and then they're fighting other creatures or people across the table, and then there's this kind of war or battle happening. Most card games operate under that basic idea. There's different economic models, different ways to play cards, but they all have that basic structure. Netrunner doesn't use that structure at all, really. It's a completely different structure for a card game, and that's also one of the things that, for whatever reason, Magic never really spoke to me as a player, and Netrunner instantly did. It's something about that fundamental structure that is speaking to me in the game.
Well, I mean, I think, when I played Netrunner, I had, I found it really difficult to pick up and fully understand it, because when I play a game, I like to kind of really understand it, and you just can't pick this game up in like even 4, 5, 10 games. I think you can get the basics, but I think to get into the meta, you've really got to understand. Well, magic's magic. And my continuing feud with Brian Wade regarding what Magic is actually like, it's good to hear somebody that, is a big Netrunner champion, and just Magic doesn't bite for me either. So, and I've played Magic a couple of times, and it's okay, but I can see why people like it, but it's still not my bag.
Yeah, no, I totally respect the game. I think that it's an amazing game. What I know of it, and the design work being done there is just crazy. How long the game's been going on, and but it's really just a personal preference, something I can't even fully express in words why I prefer this game over that game, but it's just a fact.
What are your thoughts then, the kind of the legacy type of Netrunner?
Are you talking about there was an expansion that came out recently that had the kind of Risk Legacy game? Are you talking about okay, yeah, so that was Terminal Directive. That came out, I think a couple months ago.
Yeah.
I played through it with a friend of mine, and I thought it was fun. It wasn't like, I don't know, the story didn't work as well for me for some reason.
Right.
I didn't feel as engaged with the story they had set up in Terminal Directive, but the gameplay itself and the little bit of light persistence they built on top of the game was totally fun. If people are interested in Netrunner, I think it's a great place to start, actually. Just get one copy of the core set, buy Terminal Directive, and sit down with a buddy and play through it. It's pretty interesting.
So has this, being kind of as involved in Netrunner, because it must be good about Netrunner, because it obviously doesn't take us enough. It doesn't take up an awful lot of space. I mean, it's not like Warhammer or something like that, where you got boxes upon boxes, or even, if you're getting something like, say, Conan or the other Seven Sins, where you've got like 15 boxes to deal with. It's nice that it kind of takes up space. Has playing Netrunner, have you tried other card games and then kind of stepped away from them and went, I'm not kind of sure?
Yeah, a little bit. I think just in the early design process for One Last Job, which started well after getting into Netrunner, me and my design partner, we both kind of wanted to just play a bunch of other card games. So we played Conquest, we played the second edition of Game of Thrones, we played the My Little Pony card game. We tried a bunch of stuff. And the closest to that, like, really spoke to me was the Game of Thrones card game. I thought Conquest was really cool too. I don't think I would have gotten into it competitively, but I like the game system. But yeah, the Game of Thrones card game I think is really cool too. But that being said, I think any one person can only really make space in their life for one game like this. So if I had to make the choice between Netrunner and, the Game of Thrones is still, it has a lot of cool things going on, and I absolutely love A Song of Ice and Fire is one of my favorite book series, so it has that going for it. But it still is fundamentally that game system of enemies attacking enemies like this. It does things differently. It's very different from Magic, but it still fundamentally is what it feels like to me. And nothing has come close to Netrunner in terms of just having this completely different take on the card game genre.
Have you looked at Ashes, Rise of Phoenix Born?
Oh yeah, we played Ashes a good amount. I think it's a really cool system. I'm very bad at the game. The game is, I think, it's too consistent for me. And Adam, my design partner on One Last Job, is very smart, very, very good at games, and I kind of need some randomness, some variance, some luck to beat Adam in games, I think, which Netrunner has just enough of that I can compete. But Ashes, I feel like I'm just like way behind. I have no chance of beating Adam.
It's got like fundamentally there's the decks, and you think the decks are going to kind of play the game, and then there's ones that you're thinking, well, I'm going to summon here. And it just doesn't work like Magic at all. Because you've got kind of decks where you've got about 3 characters to summon and that's it. Or you're all spell related. Or the idea of your character is to essentially remove cards from the other player in order to kind of make them lose. And I kind of really, really like the game. I dropped away from Netrunner after a while, but I think that was because there wasn't enough people around me kind of playing it enough.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then me and Colin tried Dice Masters for a little while and really, really liked Dice Masters, but then that fell foul because it was because there was too much chance in trying to get the cards and stuff like that. You ended up spending too much money on packs, and then if you weren't getting the cards you wanted, you had to go to eBay to get the cards that you wanted, and then it kind of fell away. I just really, really love the artwork on Ashes. I'm a big, big fan of the artwork on Ashes.
The artwork's incredible. It's all kind
lovely.
of it's very soft artwork. Like there's a lot of fluid shapes, a lot of kind of nebulous gases and feathers, and it's very very cool artwork. Especially the character design is just incredible in that game.
And it's bright. And it's white cards as well. And normally a lot of the card art I see is kind of like you've got a wondrous mage at the front, but the background looks like it's, being painted in kind of some kind of earthy grey brown kind of background, so it kind of removes from it, but the Ashes stuff is kind of white. And I am going to keep going on about Ashes in as many episodes as I want to, because I do like it as a game. I like the luck element with the dice. I like having to end up maybe having to make do with what you've got. You can't always guarantee you're going to get the rolls, which sometimes you have to be inventive with how you attack your opponent. So it's kind of interesting. So you're playing Netrunner, and when does it kind of click go from you thinking let's play Netrunner to I'm starting to think about maybe doing something myself? How did that transition kind of happen?
I'd say I've always been I'm always thinking about not just playing games but creating games. I've mostly created computer games, but my mind is always on that level of just there's something in me that drives me to just create a game, and it's nothing I can really rationalize. It's just a feeling I get that I kind of get an itch that I want to make something and dig into some system. So playing Netrunner for a few years, I just throughout that time, I'd also just been obsessed with the idea of a heist. I love heist movies, of course. I've read some books about various real life heists, and just been always engaged with that. So I attempted a computer game heist, and I did a different sort of more traditional board game, cooperative heist game that I did just for fun on the side. And I realized I really wanted to explore the genre of a heist in a card game, which, there's been heist card games, but I don't know of one that's been in the sort of like collectible or living card game space.
No.
Yeah. So I was really intrigued by that idea. I wanted to not necessarily copy Netrunner, but in the same way that like what Ashes does to Magic, is it takes like a basic game system and expands it out in a very different direction, but you still see the roots of Magic there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing it in a very different way. I think there's a lot of space for people to take a game like Netrunner, which again is just this very different genre of card game, and expand it out in some new way. So our game it's rooted in Netrunner in the same way that Ashes is rooted in Magic. But plays differently from Netrunner in various ways that may not be totally easy to explain, because I don't know that everyone has played enough Netrunner to... But I will do my best.
So, I mean, the video game or the computer game stuff you've done, has the stuff you've been doing, has that given you a lot of creative choice? I mean, I'm not... if you want to tell the people in terms of the game design stuff that you've been doing, is it game design? You say you're involved in programming, so what are you actually doing in your job? What's your speciality?
Sure. So I'm more of a generalist in terms of game programming, so I kind of I'm very good at understanding how to encode a game system in programming. So, a designer or myself might have an idea for a game, and how do we translate that into characters on a screen moving around and doing the things they do? Like, how do we make this weapon system work, given all of our design constraints, whatever. So I'm pretty good at that stuff. I'm just a pretty good generalist. I don't go too deep into like specific physics programming, but I know how to use all that stuff. So I've worked. The big game I worked on was called Natural Selection 2. That was the biggest game I worked on, which is like a asymmetric. It's a team game, 2 teams. One is an aliens, one is Marines, and it's this weird hybrid of a first-person shooter and a real-time strategy game. So I was the lead programmer on that. So I kind of led the programming team, and especially as we got close to release, coordinating with our playtesting team and getting bugs fixed and getting the game optimized and coordinating all the different programmers on that.
Yeah.
And I had my own indie game before that, which was kind of like a Mario Kart type game called Zero Gear.
All right, okay.
Yeah, so that was a fun one. It had some pretty, I'd say, fundamental flaws with the technology. We were trying to synchronize a full physics simulation over the internet, which is pretty much an unsolved problem. There's a lot of like hacks people have to make that work, but it's kind of a fundamental problem with the nature of space and time that no one's really been able to solve. Anyway, I've worked on a lot of smaller games in that period. I was very engaged in game jams where you kind of go somewhere for a weekend and make a game with a group of people. Yeah. I kind of lost track of what your original question was, but
it doesn't matter. There is no questions, Brian. There's just conversation, as I say. I have no questions. My notes so far are your 2 websites.
Oh, sure.
That's as far as we go. When I listen back, I'll potentially take out anything that makes me sound stupid, which, as I normally joke to people, that means you'll end up with just an entire episode of just Brian talking to himself, people.
Well, I'd appreciate if you edit out my stupid things as well, but that
no. No, they are what makes you. As I would say.
I think you asked about heist games in there. Maybe I could comment on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't anyway. There isn't, is there? I mean, it's funny enough because I've seen a lot of heist games on the indie kind of video game type scene. There's a lot of sneaking around. You have got. I'm trying to think. You have got something like Burgle Brothers, which is your 3-dimensional kind of tower game, but that's tile laying and stuff like that. But I don't think I've heard of, a collectible card game ever being surrounded by... I'm willing, obviously, to be corrected by the internet, which will obviously happen.
Yeah, no, and I honestly don't know. There might be, and I even if this was the first game like this, it's not even that interesting to me. It's more Burgle Brothers is a great example. I actually just played that on Sunday or Saturday.
Oh, okay.
I played it once before, and it's a fantastic game. It's it's not a card game. It's like you have these little meeples on a board. You move them around. You sneak around, and it has this great mechanic of picking a vault or finding the combination code of a vault, which I think is just so fantastic. It's probably my favorite part of that game. Just the way it works mechanically, it matches what you're doing. It's just perfectly in sync, and so that's a fantastic game. But like what is different from that versus a collectible style card game is you're gonna build out your deck of cards before you play a game of One Last Job, and in my mind that's kind of the point in the heist movie where they're putting together their crew. We need the grease man, we need the acrobat, there's all these characters they need. So I imagine when you're building your deck of One Last Job, you're kind of you're playing through those scenes in those movies of recruiting the various people and trying to find the perfect crew to pull off this job. When
Ocean's 11.
Yeah, we're very inspired by Ocean's 11, I'd say. We have an entire faction in the game that is basically Ocean's 11 crew.
You've got it on your YouTube video. You've got a little thing popping up. I watched it earlier on today, and it says inspired by, and then you've got the little Ocean's 11 kind of, I think, the artwork for the movie.
Definitely.
That's kind of cool. But, I mean, was it exciting to kind of look around and go, well, listen, nobody's kind of really done this, so how long did it take from you to go from kind of like actually thinking about it to having physical cards kind of sitting in front of you that you could start prototyping and playing around with?
I'd say no time at all. I don't really put a lot of thought into. That sounds funny. I don't put a lot of thought into stuff, but no. So I think
just let it go.
Yeah, I just let it go from there. Right. I don't put a lot. I kind of I had been thinking about this game in particular for probably a few months, and things kind of lined up where I kind of was coming off of a project. Things were opening up. I was feeling like I think I might want to try something on my own again. Rather than being hired to do something. And this just kept being an obsessive thing in my mind where I was like, I really want to just give it a go of making a card game. You know, how hard could this be, right? And
that's famous last words there, Brian.
No, it's not that hard. It just takes about like a year and a half of full-time design. That's all. But it's not that hard, right?
Well, why haven't you done 2 games already? Why aren't we talking about the second game that you've designed?
Yeah. So, I didn't have a specific game system or anything. I literally brought a bunch of blank cards that I got off of Amazon.com, a great website I recommend everyone checking out. And I brought them to the coffee shop with my friend Adam. And we wrote with pens on the cards and said, what if there's a card, like, what does a getaway card do? And we just started messing around with cards on that level. There wasn't a game system, but we're just throwing the cards down on the table and moving them around and seeing what it felt like.
And it just came up from there. Did it just kind of naturally start to click together? Did you think, okay, well, these guys need roles, and this guy needs this, and we need to overcome, what kind of thing are they going to come up against in a heist movie, and what kind of special skills are they going to need, and then what kind of equipment, and are there going to be some kind of surprises and stuff like that? Is that kind of how it did?
We like to joke that it's not really a joke. We like to joke that we kind of designed about 3 or 4 separate independent games throughout this process, and each of them had various pros. And there was a version of the game that we thought was fascinating, and it was just like, it was really fun to play, but we would play a game. It would take like 2 hours, and at the end of that, we couldn't play the game again because we were so fatigued mentally. It was too chessy. It was too, the thought was so deep to play that game that we needed to adjust it. It was not right for a card game that we were trying to build. So yeah, we went through many different iterations of the game, and some of them are just completely different games. I'd say my biggest, the thing I would change from the start, if I had to go back, was not getting so mechanical at the start. We went mechanical really quick, where we just started trying to figure out systems and mechanics to make those systems work. I would have held off on that a little bit. I would have tried to stay just on the emotional level a little bit longer and just figure out what are the emotions we're trying to evoke here with this card game before going too deep on the mechanics.
Is that not the Netrunner part? Because if you were embroiled in Netrunner, then you would be sitting there and going, okay, I'll ice this, I'll do this, do that, do the next thing. Then score this agenda. I guess if you're kind of like trapped in that kind of thought, it must have been difficult to kind of get away and think, well, I know the intricacies of the meta of one game, so if we start off with the intricacies of the meta in my own game, is that kind of how you ended up? Did you end up having? You said you kind of ended up having to break away, or you would have broken away from that a lot quicker.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't know if I'd even thought of it in those terms, but that's maybe we kind of latched on to Netrunner too quickly. We knew we wanted to get the game to feel more like Netrunner than it felt like a traditional card game. We knew that. Yeah. But we may have latched onto Netrunner mechanics too early, just in terms of how we structured the defense and how we structured the attack. And we tried to subvert it originally. We thought of the crew as like having this position of defending the heist, sort of like they're trying to pull off this heist, and the other player, which originally was just like the police, was trying to disrupt that. And we thought that was a cool subversion of the basic idea of attack and defense, which should have been the other way. But I'm not sure if that was really justified, or if we were just trying to like subvert the expectations, or just to surprise ourselves even.
Yeah, just be different for the sake of being different.
Yeah, we may have been doing that early.
Yeah, like after Reservoir Dogs came out, you probably got so many other kind of copycat kind of films, not copycat heist films, but just films restructuring how they did their film in order to kind of like jump on the kind of the bandwagon side of things. How does it play? I'm sitting across from you. I have got my, it's asymmetrical. So you have got you've got a place, and your place will have the stuff you can steal. How does it kind of lay out? What can people expect when they're going to jump in and maybe have a round of like one last job?
Sure. Yeah, the basic structure, there's in the middle of the table, there will be 3 locations. The game starts with 1 location in play, and it kind of grows out to 3. So there's just 3 kind of shared cards in the middle of the table that represent locations. The game will ship with 3 different heists. So one of them, for example, is like this mansion party. This is the society faction, which is like the secret society. They're hosting this party of all the bigwigs, the politicians, the business interests coming together for some nebulous, maybe, reason. And the crew there's a vault in the mansion they're trying to get to. And then there's a kind of a train heist. And there's also a casino job that the mob faction is kind of in the casino. And so that's kind of the structure of the game, is the players are competing over these locations to resolve the plot of that scene in their favor. It's kind of the way we structure it.
So do they just pick a location to begin with, and then they decide that's the one they're gonna go for?
It's randomized, so there's kind of 10 cards that represent these locations. They have slightly different properties, just on like how well defended they are, and there's a few different types of defenses, so there's just some numbers on there that are different for the most part. There's also like some locations are private, some are public, and that has influence in the game over how safe it is for the crew to hang out in that location. And so those are randomized, and we call them the powers that be. So that's like the mob or the secret society or this megalomaniac character that we have. They are the powers that be, and they are trying to influence these scenes towards their ends. So they might be transporting, in the case of the megalomaniac, maybe he's transporting some nuclear weapons, or the secret society are trying to, gain influence over politicians, whatever. And that's what they're trying to do. They're doing that independent of what the crew is doing. So the crew, if they don't do anything, the powers will just kind of build their influence out and win the game. And the crew is really just this disruptive force that's... that's kind of the structure.
That makes it interesting, because you're not just going in and saying they've got jewels, steal the jewels. It's almost a case of, if you don't do anything at all, then I'm kind of going to win this, because I get to basically fulfill whatever kind of my devious scheme is going to be. So you're not necessarily robbing good folks. You might be necessarily robbing the bad guys in order to stop them from doing stuff.
In some cases, yeah. And that again kind of depends on. We're trying to not be explicit in the storytelling of that. So in some cases, the crew is just there's something in the vault they want that's valuable, that's worth money. In other cases, maybe the government hired this crew to go try and steal these nuclear weapons before they before they get to their destination. That stuff, a lot of that we're trying to keep more open, and the cards and the play, we hope, will tell that story without us having to explicitly state this. Okay.
Are you going for a very, very serious tone to it? Is it kind of a slightly light mood? I mean, is this a game that you could have essentially the kind of the comedy London Cockney geezer? You know
sure.
What I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I want to be all over the spectrum. I want to have some elements that are dark and, and not very pleasant. And then I want to have others that are just totally silly. Like, we have an entire faction of the game that is the street gangs. And this is kind of inspired by I think it was a 70s movie called The Warriors.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's such a good film.
Come out to play.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a fantastic movie. It's about these street gangs in New York City. They each have a theme. One of them is like, we're baseball players, or like one of them is we have roller skates. Yeah. And so they all have their like team flavor. And so we have street gangs, and we have 2 street gangs that are going to ship in the... I shouldn't promise this stuff, because some of this is still fluid, but we have the Flock, which is kind of this zealot group of religious fanatics that are kind of like stealing for God in their mind. And then we have the Cassidy bunch, which are these cowboys. And so they'll go into like a bank on a horse and demand that they're paid. My goodness. Like, they don't fully understand that they're in the modern world. They're kind of cowboys, and they approach problems the way that maybe a person in 1840s would.
You're gonna have the London squad then? You're gonna have the Italian job guys?
We could, you
have to.
That would probably be our profession. We have a faction called the Professionals, which are kind of more inspired by Ocean's 11, and so I think it would be good to have.
I think a good old London one, a good old get the UK represented. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Michael Caine.
Yeah, we could have a Michael Caine character.
You could have a Michael Caine, and this is when you drop in your Michael Caine impression, Brian.
I don't think I'm going to be willing to do that right now. I would need some time to prep.
I need to breathe. I need to get your early meant to blow the bloody doze off. That kind of thing. This is, I don't know, this kind of all of a sudden is very, very interesting. In terms of the collectible stuff, it could be just the different gangs. Okay, so you've got your gangs together. Is there then prep stuff? Do you then decide on the equipment that you're going to take, or is it a kind of equipment on site kind of thing?
It's the way the deck is structured. I mean, both sides have slightly different cards, but both sides have people. We call them actors are on the power side, and then we have operatives. Operatives are on the crew side. They're both just people. Those are your primary kind of ways to interact. That you need operatives. You don't necessarily need actors, but you certainly need operatives to attempt these operations that you're pulling off as part of this bigger heist. So the game, there's a lot of little operations that add up to the full heist. If you think of a heist movie, they're always having to like go scope out some building, steal a key card from a guard. Those are all smaller operations. So the crew deck has operatives. They also have items. So there's a wide variety of items, anywhere from like a lasso for the cowboys. There's some traditional kind of like lock picking tools and tranquilizer guns and getaway cars and all that kind of stuff that operatives can equip. And so you kind of attach those cards onto the operatives, and now you're kind of upgrading that operative with some new ability or more capacity for skill, which is what they use as sort of a resource to, get through challenges in the heist.
Yeah, I've seen on the video you've got an interesting point where you're using kind of like meeples or counters, and they're getting used in order to get past kind of certain things that come up that are drawn on the cards, because I'm right, when they've selected their equipment and when they've got to decide they're going to try and get past a particular area. Now that could be like a camera or a locked door, and they've got to use certain skills to do that. But in order to get past that, they've then got to allocate almost like skill points, these little kind of meeples or counters you were using. See, I did watch the video.
I believe it now.
There you go. I'm not just saying it for like I watched 30 seconds. But then once they get through, then you've got it's almost like they get to pick from a set of face down cards. You can't really see what's going to happen, and then you could turn over a card, and then that could trigger kind of like an event. It could be alarms going off, or it could be that something happens that affects a piece of equipment. So there's kind of
so what this all kind of represents is the crew has the ability to prepare as much as they want. You're not forced to engage in these operations. You can just build up the whole game if you want, but again, the powers will just score out while you're doing that. So you're kind of always on this timer, like the shipment is going to be made, the party's going to end, and you have a window of time where you need to execute your plan. So it's a race in that regard. You're trying to set up and prepare and mitigate for all these things that could happen. You have a little bit of information. You're like, well, we know there's 2 guards there. We don't know exactly what they're equipped with. We don't know, but we can kind of like mitigate to some extent. We could be like, okay, we're going to go in. We have this character here. This operative is really good at sneaking past guards. So we're going to send that operative in, and we're going to give that operative some lock picking tools, which they won't be able to deal with a big lock, but they can deal with like a small thing they might come across. And
okay.
So you can, it's very fluid in how there's a lot of, you can be very risky if you want, or you can try and build up and be very certain. And it's just, that might change game to game. You might need to respond more quickly in some games, and you might need to slow down and build up something bigger in another game. It just totally depends.
So are the actors or the bad guys kind of winning? Is that just based on a number of rounds? The more rounds that you leave it, then the more likely they are to fulfill their particular kind of plan.
It's based on so there's these, we call them resolutions. So that you mentioned, there's a deck of cards at each scene. There's about 5 of them at a scene, and the crew is trying to find the resolution to that scene.
Okay.
So it kind of represents that they're going to go into that scene and they're looking for that key card, or they're looking to put the USB stick into the server. And as they're doing that, they might run into some unforeseen problems. There might be a security camera that they have to kind of wait to sneak by or whatever. And in other cases, they'll just kind of sail right in and things will work out. And so that's that kind of probability, and there's always a little bit of luck involved in any heist. You just read about real life heists, and most of them go horribly wrong. It's not even close. And then the ones that succeed, it's usually because they got extremely lucky in one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least at any sort of big, beyond just the kind of takeover robbery or whatever, any sort of big orchestrated heist, there's always some bit of luck. And then like when they get caught, it's because they ate a bologna sandwich and threw away half of it, and then that left DNA evidence, which was a real thing that happened.
Exactly.
And I lost my train of thought because I got excited about thinking about heists.
No, it's fine. I mean, as I say, there is no scripts. We're just making it up as we go along.
Off script, right?
Well, always, off script, as you said. I mean, otherwise you would have called your company, measured and well planned.
Yeah, that's not really my style.
No. In terms of the base set, now, are you going to be shipping this out with a lot of the different kind of groups available, or are you a base game with a couple of kind of actors and operatives in it? I mean, what's the plan for kind of release?
Sure. The plan right now, and I say that because, things are fluid and who knows, but what I really want to do, and what it's looking like we're going to be doing, is we'll have just this core box that people can buy. And the game, I want to stress, the game, we would like to expand it over time, and it would be in like a fixed model, not randomized. But we would like to do that, but that's unknown. There's a lot of factors somewhat beyond our control that will influence that. So the core box will be complete. Like we're balancing it in itself. We have a lot of cards we'd like to play with that are possible expansion cards. We don't test with those right now. We're trying to make sure the core box is a dynamic, fun game in and of itself and is well balanced. So it will feature 3 factions per side. So there's a total of essentially 6 decks in the box. And there's deck building rules within that lets you change up your decks. But there's 3 factions per side. They each kind of have strengths and weaknesses and core strategies that they employ to win the game. Some are more aggressive. Some are more taxing rather than trying to stop you. There's all different ways to play the game. But that's what we're looking to ship, on Kickstarter.
Oh, right, okay. So, that was my next question, is how are you getting these bad boys out to the good people, or these good boys out to the bad people? Unless there's somebody listening who is like really gung-ho to publish a game like this, which I don't know, this is sort of an unusual game. There's not a lot of publishers that are looking to publish card games as far as I've talked to, and certainly not a game that isn't fantasy or sci-fi, which seems to be the most popular. So we're kind of doing this more contemporary game. Unless a publisher magically presents themselves, we are looking at Kickstarter right now to get this produced. And where are you in terms of the Kickstarter? I mean, how far away is the Kickstarter at the moment?
That's a good question. So right now my focus is on producing artwork for the campaign. So I have some pieces that I don't know exactly where they're going to fit into the campaign, but I know we need them to demonstrate one of the factions or demonstrate some mechanic of the game or core idea or feeling of the game. So I'm working to produce those pieces of art right now. And I'm also working with a friend of mine on the campaign, which is going a little bit slow, but I'm looking to ramp up the speed on that very soon.
Yeah, but the thing with Kickstarter is that if you're going to do it, you really got to do it right. I think if one thing I've learned by speaking to people over the last 18 months, has it really been 18 months we've been doing this now? Is that it's all about, people are going, oh, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. It's kind of like, I think Kickstarter's becoming a case that you can see somebody that maybe hasn't taken all of their time on their campaign. And it's a difficult thing to do, especially if you're kind of doing it for the first time and resources aren't necessarily kind of abundant forever, if you know what I mean. Have you got a rough idea even of when it might be going out there?
Yeah, I definitely want to put it up this year.
Yeah, okay.
At this point, it's certainly going to be after Gen Con, because I'm not going to put it up during Gen Con.
No,
that doesn't seem wise. I mean,
no.
I'm not a big believer that this, you have to put up your Kickstarter on a specific day or a specific time, but I do know releasing during Gen Con would be a bad idea.
Yeah.
So beyond that, it's sort of as soon as possible, and the as soon as possible part is where it's possible in that it's something that I am really excited about personally. Like, I want to look at the page and just sort of do a mind wipe on myself and try and look at it and see, does this look really compelling to me? So I've decided to slow down on it a little bit. Like, I was really rushing towards it to get it up before Gen Con, which would have had to have been like at the start of this month, basically. I was rushing for that, and I was kind of realizing I'm not going to make it in time, and I'm putting a lot of time into this. So I decided to slow down and put more time into it. Less intense. Like, I'm not going to be spending 60, 70 hours a week on it. But I'm going to just have a longer period of time that I put into it to try and make sure the quality is where I want it to be.
Yeah, there's no point in kicking your own ass over something like this. I mean, at the end of the day, most people will do something along the lines of Kickstarter probably a total of no times at all during their life. So, I mean, if you're going to do something like this, it might as well, when you're kind of, I guess, when you're ready to give you kind of your full kind of commitment. Have you thought about pricing and stuff like that then, or is that still something you're working out? Yeah,
so I'm not very good at business stuff and money stuff. I'm pretty good at programming, and I'm okay at design,
right.
And I'm really good at Netrunner. But beyond that, I'm joking, but I am actually pretty good at Netrunner.
I've no doubt you're very, very good at Netrunner. Do you know what I mean? Because it'll be good. We could play sometime over Skype, and you could teach me.
Yeah, sure. There's a good online platform for it too. But I have gone as far as I have a spreadsheet I've made, and I've put estimates in there and I filled in some of those estimates. Like, I've got manufacturer estimates that I've put in, and I'm trying to factor in all the details like taxes and whatnot. And so I am really worried about that. I've heard enough horror stories of not considering the box size on a UPS shipment or whatever, that I'm really paranoid about that stuff, and I'm trying very hard to be diligent and be good at business on that level and just make sure that our estimates are accurate. And to answer your original question, I'm trying to find, I want the price point to be around $30 is what I'm looking at, because I think a card game of this level usually goes for about that amount. And I want to put enough into the box to justify that amount. I hope the game itself is worth that, but I want to make sure there's enough cards in there and enough variety that people see that as being valuable, worth that money.
It's kind of interesting that you say you don't know what to do. I mean, I am part of a UK Kickstarter group, which is the greatest irony, because I have no intention of ever creating a Kickstarter, except maybe for There was two we've joked about. One of them was called Greeks in Space, which is about people who are part of the Greek Space Authority trying to get enough money together to be able to land their rocket back in Greece.
Oh, which was this is a modern setting. I thought you were gonna go for like Greeks, 2,000 years ago.
After what Lords of Helios just pulled out the bag, I don't think so. Did you see that Kickstarter?
I did not know.
Oh, it was like imagine the kind of the gods of ancient times, but kind of being like robot representations, and it did about something silly like about $2 million or something on Kickstarter.
I can't even imagine how that works, but I'm fascinated. I'll have to go look that one up.
You'll have to go and look at that. That was quite interesting. But that was what was it? Who was I speaking? I think it was Ed. Who was speaking with about Everdark recently, and we came up with that idea. But there's another idea that we came up with, me and Ian Schofield, which was Dungeon Patisserie, which was basically it was something to do with collecting ingredients in a dungeon in order to make cakes.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I know. And
so,
the more
are you looking for flour, or are you looking for dungeon-related things?
I think you're looking for dungeon-related kind of items, and you get different levels of ingredients, and you can either go for normal cakes or you can go for super-duper pastries kind of thing.
There's infinite possibilities here. I think you're on this.
I know, and I've just spilt my guts to everybody that's listening. So that's
someone's definitely going to see this idea.
That's going to be out on Kickstarter by the end of the month. You can just guarantee. But no, I mean, as I say, no intention of the irony is I've no intention of making a Kickstarter, but we kind of hang around the UK Kickstarter group because there's a lot of good people there, and we have got a lot of guests from there as well, who have come on and spoken about their games, and there is a lot of help out there as well. So I don't know if there's probably a California Kickstarter
There's
group.
a general Facebook group, I forget what it's called, just on Kickstarter help that I'm a part of. I'm not too good at Facebook, but I try and keep my eye on that. And I have a really good local community here. I'm in the Bay Area near San Francisco, and we have a really good, just like board game designer community, and we're always trying to support each other. And there's plenty of people that will at least be able to give me feedback on the campaign. So I feel very well supported in that regard.
How many other people have played? How many other people have played the game then?
Well, I don't know. We've done hundreds of play tests, but most of those are, between myself and Adam. But yeah, that's a good question. I mean, dozens. Beyond that, I don't really have a good idea of how many individuals have played.
Okay. And is the plan to do... I mean, you must have a million different things to be thinking about, especially if you're thinking about kind of launching the Kickstarter. Do you have other games after this? Is this your sole focus just now, or has this kind of lit a fire underneath you to think, actually, we could maybe do this as a card game, or we could maybe do this as a mini game, or has it think, well, actually, maybe this as a video game might kind of work? Has that kind of got the creative kind of thoughts flowing in your head?
Yeah, originally I was thinking this would be a digital card game. So that was my original idea with this. And some of our design work, especially early on, was with some of those constraints. Yeah. Like no interrupts and things like that you see in Hearthstone. And part of that also is just being a game programmer, and Adam is he's done a lot of back-end programming, server-side programming, and we even worked on. We had a somewhat functioning prototype of it early on, and at some point we just decided instead of investing a lot more time into a digital card game, which is pretty intensive to make, we would do a Kickstarter and use that to sort of gauge the market. And from there, it's turned much more into its own thing. I would still like to do a digital card game version of this eventually, but that's very much... That's well down the line. I think if this is super successful, as I hope it is, and then we do some expansions for it, that's at that point I would consider those ideas again. But to go back to your original question, I think if I didn't constrain myself, I would be working on a new game every day. It's just kind of I get really excited about some I don't know, I'll just see something on the streets, though, that will inspire me in some way. Like, that cat just made a really cool jump off that roof onto that tree. And, now I want to make a game about cats jumping on trees or something. That's just, like, my brain. I think it's very common where designers you always want to just be jumping into the next thing, because it's difficult to actually finish a game is, like, very challenging, any sort of a game. Even if that just means finishing it and putting it up on the internet as a print and play. Getting to that point is way more difficult than starting a new project. So I'm always suppressing myself and stopping myself from working on some new project in the interest of actually finishing this game. That's kind of where I'm at.
No, I mean, when we had Andrew Burkett on from Atheris Games, and he was talking about, he did one game which was Cul-de-sac Conquest, which is about houses, and then his next game after that was Mutant Crops, and then he was talking about sock ghosts and, T-Rexes and, sock ghosts is ghosts that steal socks, and then,
Sure.
And a game based around falling asleep at work. So, it's like a case of, is there any other games that have been falling asleep at work? And it's like, no, and it's like kind of, make it. Bez, who's a friend of the show, she's doing a game called Blether, and blether is a Scottish term which basically is what I do, which is talk too much and don't breathe enough kind of thing. But the game is basically, here's a selection of words and phrases, and you're meant to just construct an entire sentence as long as you possibly can without taking a break, and thus scoring points for how long you go on for. I believe it's something along those lines. So any idea is a kind of a good idea. I mean, Ian Schofield that we had on that I mentioned earlier, his game is about orcs going into the dungeon and smashing each other up for orc teeth in order to win the game. There's kind of different games all the time. I think it's strange because we are in a golden age where we're reaching the you see with video games where you'll go on, like, say, the PlayStation Store or Steam, and there's thousands of games out there, and I think we're approaching that critical mass with board games where just another dungeon crawler isn't maybe going to cut it anymore. That even, Simon, Cool Mini or Not's latest project, Rising Sun, had the miniature side of it, but it also had to have a diplomacy side of it to make it stand out from the crowd kind of thing. So that's kind of always kind of interesting.
Sure. And in a somewhat, I'd say, unique setting as well. Like, it's like feudal Japan, I think.
Yeah.
Did have fantasy. I didn't actually pledge that one myself, but it just looking at it, it looked very different and fresh.
Yes. Yes. Which is always good. And then we've got things like the Grim Forest coming out, which looks absolutely amazing. As I say, Lords of Helios, I kind of almost went for it, and then I went, come on, my children need shoes.
Board games are good, but shoes are very good.
Shoes and lunches are quite good, and especially if it's raining this much in Scotland, then obviously the kids need a jacket, kind of as well.
So it's something I remember just thinking about your original question of, are there other projects, whatever.
Yeah.
I heard this thing, and it really resonated with me that, people, if you have some project you're excited about, it doesn't have to be a game. It could be whatever. Maybe someone's into poetry. Like, I'm going to write a book about poetry, and I'm really pumped about this. I read that if you tell people about your aspiration for a project, it has like this psychological offloading quality where you feel like you've accomplished whatever that project is just by telling people you want to do it. And so you shouldn't tell people what projects you aspire to work on. So I don't know if that's true. I've heard there's been studies or whatever, but it made sense to me. And so I do have other projects that I kind of work on the side, and I have all these aspirations, but I don't ever really talk about them for that reason, which is maybe silly. But and I also just try to limit the amount of time I work on those, because I could be putting that time into one last job.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, the last thing that I ever did that was I went around the office and said, "You just wait, I will do a board game podcast," and I stormed off.
And you did it, though.
Yeah, I know, but that was after them. It was pretty much people saying, "So is it? Do you have a wand when do you dress up as a wizard when you're playing D&D?" And it's like, we we don't do wizards. We never play as wizards, and that's where the kind of the name for the show kind of came from. One Last Job sounds fascinating. It's kind of the Netrunner connection has pricked my ears up. The fact that I've not really heard many kind of heist games kind of going about, if any, has kind of pricked up my ears as well. So if, like me, there's people out there that are interested in keeping an eye on what you guys are going to be doing, whereabouts can they find you on the internet webs, basically?
Sure. Yeah, I'd say that the best way is if you're on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. You can follow my personal account at Brian G. Cronin. And then we also have a Twitter account for the game, which I believe is just at One Last Job. I don't remember.
I think it is. I'll tell you what, let's check it live.
Yeah,
live
sure.
and direct.
And this is all, you could go to our website, onelastjobgame.com.
Yeah.
And all this stuff is linked from there, of course. But that's the best way. We also have a mailing list you could find on that website that I've not even sent out yet. I'm kind of waiting until we have something more concrete about the Kickstarter. But that's another good way to just stay in touch.
So the Twitter is One Last Job Game. Okay. With the little @ sign in front for people that aren't aware. And that's how Twitter works.
I really am a big fan of Twitter. I'm on there daily, and if anyone wants to just message me on there and have a chat, I'm definitely up for it. I could send you my Netrunner decks if you want to see those.
Hey.
I have some pretty dumb ones that I've been brewing, so there's a lot of fun there.
Now, there's an opening line if I ever heard one. Would you like to see my Netrunner decks?
But only to certain people. I don't say that to everyone.
This has been a lot of fun, Brian.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course, if people want to keep an eye on what we are doing, and this is show number 76. I don't know how we got here, but somehow we did. We would have been normally retiring if we were actually 76 years old. But if you do want to keep a track on what we're up to, go to Google and search for We're Not Wizards. You will find us on Instagram, you will find us on Facebook, you will find us on Twitter, you will find us on Pinterest now of all places, because apparently pictures are good. You will find us on YouTube if you search for We're Not Wizards Tabletop Podcast. You will find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, Podknife, all these good places. If you have listened tonight and you've liked what you heard, please jump over to Apple Podcasts, because that is what they are called, and leave us a review. Now remember, as we say, don't give us a 10, because that will make us kind of really, really big-headed. But don't give us a 0 or a 1, because that will make us cry. Kind of give us a 5, which is kind of average, and we are kind of decidedly average. But one person who has not been average at all is Mr. Brian Cronin. Listen, again, this has been very educational for me. I must say I'm very, very interested to see what happens with not only One Last Job, but also to see what happens with off-script games as well. I can only thank you again for coming on and chatting to us and telling us about the game, and keep an eye out for what, as I say, as soon as we hear, we'll get some news out there when we hear some more about the release dates and stuff like that, Brian.
I appreciate it. And maybe not average, maybe a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 if you're feeling generous.
Yeah.
7 would be great.
7's good. 7 would be fine if they can do that on iTunes.
Thanks for having me on. Oh,
it's been a pleasure, Brian. As I say, it's good fun. There are only a couple more things to do. Now, the first thing, as always, is to remember that we are many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Brian?
I'm certainly not.
I am definitely thinking about robbing a bank now. I'm just...
Good idea.
I'm just being honest. I've got my deck of cards here. I think I could just walk in here and say, look, I've got a card that's got a safe cracker, a shotgun,
in my
and
reading,
a tranquilizer gun.
I probably shouldn't be saying this, but in my reading, like, the chances of someone succeeding in their first bank heist is very high. Like, the amount of people that get away, just your first time going into a bank with a gun and saying, give me money, your chances of getting away are pretty high. But, like, if you keep doing it, you will get caught. But, that's just a fact. Do with that what you want.
So it's a goodbye from Brian, the crime enabler, Cronin. Say goodbye, Brian. You're about to go down for a long stretch.
Goodbye.
And it's I can't believe you just... Guys, don't go and rob banks.
It's true, though. Just statistically, it's true.
You know that 87% of statistics are made up on the spot.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That's really true. And it's a goodbye from me, because it looks like I'm obviously will probably get done as an accessory.
Yeah, definitely an accomplice.
Definitely an accomplice. Remember, stay away from safes. Roll sixes. Listen, the smart one, the clever one, the funny one, the guy that's just come out of jail, the girl that's capable of doing everything. You want these type of people on your crew, and then that'll suit you out. But remember and take along a Brian, because without your Brian, you won't have anything else in your one last job. But until the next time, it's a goodbye. So say goodbye, Brian.
Goodbye, Brian.
And it's a goodbye from me. Goodbye.